I'll start out by answering the question I posed in the title with one simple word. Yes. Cuphead's DLC may very well have been the best $8 I've ever spent. While it does have low points, I would argue that it also brought the game the best airplane and standard Gunstar level. I could go on and on, ranting about how much I love this DLC, but I might as well get into the actual meat and potatoes of this video. The fight that I began my first playthrough with, the Bootlegger Boogie. And what a start this was. My jaw was on the floor when I got to see the Flying Gentleman in-game. To have that immediately followed up by a polished form of the light in the very next phase nearly made me faint. While the final phase was something entirely new to me, it was still incredibly welcome as it kept up that exciting fast pace. While that false knockout was incredibly irritating the first time I experienced it and got killed by it, I now realize it's rather hilarious. My one and only complaint, and it's very small, is a common symptom of having minions patrolling the arena, and that is the shrinking of the boss's repertoire of attacks to make room for the sort of non-attacks of the minions. I wouldn't exactly say that's a huge issue for me though. Overall, I found the Moonshine Mob to be a very enjoyable foe. 8 out of 10. Now I'll move on to what was probably the most unique element of the DLC, the King's Leap. For one, I'd like to point out that I called there would be an all-parrying challenge before the DLC even released. I was a little mistaken about the format though, as I had anticipated a reworking of the airship. I'm not at all upset though that I was mistaken, because the King's Leap is really a spectacle to behold. The use of a stop-motion sculpture as a background really blew me away. The bosses themselves? Yeah, they were good. Here's my relative ranking from worst to best. Pawns, bishop, queen, rook, knight. Yeah, I thought the knight was fun.
You shut up!
Overall, I thought the King's Leap was a very solid and enjoyable change of pace. Now, let's get into my second boss I encountered of my first run, Glumstone the Giant. Glumstone's first phase was wildly overwhelming. You've got potion gnomes, you've got hammer gnomes, you've got cannon gnomes, you've got spiky gnomes, you've got lots of geese, and you're randomly moving on platforms, and you got a bear. That's just the first phase. That being said, it almost feels like MDHR crammed so much stuff into the first phase they forgot to add stuff to the other two. Phase 2 is fun, but it almost feels like just a more frantic version of Ribby and Croak's Phase 2, with randomly placed gnomes flying all over the place. It doesn't necessarily feel super saturated with lots of stuff. Phase 3 is of course very amusing and disturbing all at once, as you have to fight off Glumstone's stomach ulcer, while scuba gnomes pop in and out of the stomach acid below you, shooting darts at you on their way. I did think that the gimmick of resetting the platforms was entertaining and cool, but I still thought that the moveset was a little lackluster and empty. Overall, pretty good boss. Glumstone gets a 6 out of 10 from me. Okay, now I'm gonna go into what didn't really work for me in this DLC. As a side note, we're gonna venture here into major spoiler territory, so if you're not interested in being spoiled for the delicious last course, I'd skip ahead to the next chapter. Okay, now that I have everyone here who's all good with being spoiled, I welcome you to Sunny's Spoiler Zone. I'll start with my less controversial opinion. The Angel and Devil fight wasn't good. The puzzle before it was cool and all, giving purpose to some seemingly useless NPCs up on that mountain, but to put it nicely, I understand why this phase was cut from the initial Devil fight. In MDHR's defense, it's a pretty cool concept to try and force the player to manage attacks that are nullified if you turn away from them, but activate if you face them. That being said, it's a lot better on paper than it is in practice. It's just chaos to have to manage projectiles that don't even exist sometimes. The fact that the angel and devil switch based on the direction you're facing makes maneuvering around the level incredibly awkward. I can usually find some good in levels, but I'll be honest, I hate this level. 2 out of 10. Okay, here's what you're gonna hate me for. I thought Salt Baker was a letdown of a final fight. I don't think he was bad, I just don't think he had a final boss quality to him. I really enjoyed the difficulty and bullet hellishness, but my issue can come down to 2 words. Passive attacks. To describe what I mean, I'd just point to the first 2 phases. I never really felt like Salt Baker killed me. All of his attacks involved ingredients flying around the screen. I felt like I was getting killed by projectiles instead of the boss itself. I mean, he has a big knife and hammer, so why couldn't he just... Oh well. Instead, we got these stupid little fire guys. So, to reiterate, I thought it was an enjoyable fight with a great spectacle of a second phase, but it's dragged down by passive attacking and that darn third phase. Okay, hot takes over. The next thing I'd like to cover is the new weapons and charms. In my opinion, there's really only 2 of them worth using. The Astral Cookie and the Crack Shot. Chalice has a fun moveset, and honestly, I think the parry dash might be my favorite new mechanic, because it just has so much utility. Now, with the exception of that 4th hit point, I feel like Chalice is actually fairly balanced. The dodge roll I think is fair because you have to be on the ground to use it, and the double jump works well because Chalice's initial jump is a lot lower than the Cup Brothers. Crack Shot is cool because it actually relies on aiming and has decent damage up close. So it's almost like if Chaser was good. Just generally solid and versatile weapon. In terms of the broken, cursed divine relic, it's a fun questline, but the charm is just too overpowered to be fun. Also, Heart Ring, I don't like it. There's not enough of a downside to using it, so I again argue too overpowered. And I don't mean to gatekeep, but I find that it kinda takes away from the weight of getting a fully S-ranked game. I never really used Converge much, but I guess it's cool that they brought back an unused weapon, even if it's aggressively mid. The only compliment I can bestow upon Twist Up is that it's really good for doing a worst shot challenge. In summary, there's a big arsenal of new equipment here, but really only 2 of them are worth your time. You guys, we're getting into masterpiece territory now. Starting with the Howling Aces. Howling Aces might be in my top 5 bosses of Cuphead. Well, there certainly is a learning curve to controlling your platform. With practice it becomes pretty fluid. I also cannot express how hard I laughed when I pressed play for the first time to find that the fight, whose icon is literally a plane, is fought on your feet. Well, the attacks are about as varied here as they are in Glumstone's first and second phases. I can't get upset because they just work so well in the environment of the fight. Well, I will admit the second phase feels like a lull, but outside of it, the fight is incredibly fast-paced and enjoyable. The aspect flip in the last phase is disorienting to say the least, but I think the gimmick works, as the fight gives you plenty of time to react. Overall, I love the character design, music, gimmicks, and gameplay of this fight, and the Howling Aces earn a 9 out of 10 in my book. Oh yeah, Esther Winchester rocks. This is without a doubt my favorite airplane boss in the game as a whole. I love how the first phase is separated into 2 different levels, which force you to learn how to dodge her various attacks on both the top and bottom, making her already wide moveset feel even more diverse. Second phase is chaotic fun with a bullet hell attack where projectiles come from behind you, being chained into a bunch of projectiles with set trajectories that track your location when they reach the screen's edge. Now, I understand that doesn't sound like much, but I feel like these two attacks are just so flawlessly executed, I can't complain. Since I can't do justice to it myself, I'm just gonna take a pause here for a minute and let you watch this phase tradition. Yeah, half a year later from first seeing this, and this still remains one of the most likely, hilarious, and disturbing experiences I've ever had gaming. And wow, this third phase is fun. Best place to be is on top, but the existence of hazards at the top of the screen force you to do some maneuvering and still think on your feet. The final phase is pure stress. There's never a consistent point of safety throughout. Does it maybe last a few seconds too long? Yeah. But it still serves as a great attention check at the end of the fight, if not also a great hindrance to my S ranking. I'd also like to point out that this boss has awesome style. As it always is, MDHR's animation is absolutely stunning, and the Wild West vibe just goes above and beyond for me, and the music really completed that for me. Overall, this fight's elements, mechanics, character design, gameplay, animation, and music were all so cohesive and make one of my favorite Cuphead fights ever. Do you hear that? Is that the best boss fight I've ever played? That's right, it's Mortimer Freeze, folks. This fight is everything to me. It just screams pure, unfettered fun. If any fight immediately comes to mind when someone says Cuphead, it's Snow Cold Scuffle. This fight tells you exactly what it is. No BS or awkward gimmicks get in its way. You just press play and go. Phase 1 is fast-paced while also forcing you to pay attention to what you're actually firing at. Heck, this guy has a giant orange whale that has a constellation on his head, and he tries to kill you with it. How perfectly bizarre is that? Phase 2 is where things get real. Morty gets absorbed into a big snow golem where he can change sides on whim, launching bouncing splitter ice cubes, which he does by turning into a refrigerator, which I think is pretty great. He can summon blades from the ground at you and throw sentient killer popsicles at you. I find that there are enough movement and attack combo possibilities in this phase that it really never gets old. That third phase still brings the heat, or I guess doesn't bring the heat, considering the fight's ice theme. Okay, terrible puns aside, that third phase is quite the spectacle. You fight beneath the Aurora Borealis, and what does Mortimer become but a Gen Z liberal? The attacks in this phase are spectacularly weird, but work all very well in terms of actual gameplay. He might open a little door on his snowflakes to throw buckets at you that explode into little effigies of the moon. He might eject his eye from his own head to zap you with its laser, only to swallow it once it boomerangs back to him. Heck, his snowflake might become a snow cone stand, which his ghost pops out of and summons little snow cones to go and kill you. I've heard some people say this fight is boring or uninteresting, but I'd only point to its lack of lead-up and its general understated nature. But if it wasn't clear, I'd consider this fight to be MDHR's quiet masterpiece. Yeah, it's incredible, but it knows it, and it's really humble about it, which I think serves it even more, since there's no fanfare that gets in the way of this fight's unbridled fun. Also, come on, this song is just awesome. It's truly some of the best Latin jazz I've ever heard, and while I may be biased, just listen to this clarinet solo and tell me you just don't feel cool. To wrap up my review of this fight, I'll just say, to me, this is a 10 out of 10 boss, and maybe my favorite boss fight in all of gaming. It doesn't get much better than this, folks. Well, there you have it, friends. My general retrospective look at Cuphead the Delicious Last Course. Sure, it has its low points, but still, MDHR does not disappoint. If you've watched any sort of overview for the Delicious Last Course, you're probably tired of hearing this statistic, but there are more frames of animation in the DLC than the entirety of the base game, and it really shows. Fortunately, it's also got the same iconic, fast-paced, frantic gameplay I've come to love from Cuphead. So yeah, if you haven't picked it up yet, well, I'm not going to force you to do anything, but yeah, you should play it. Until next time, don't forget to take care of yourself, and always be you. Peace